Hi everyone. My name is Famela Nicole Ponce, and today I'll be sharing on my report on the approach and techniques in conducting a radio interview. Now, let's be honest, interviews are something we hear everywhere on radios, on YouTube, on podcasts, and even on TikTok lives. But behind those seemingly simple conversations are layers of techniques, psychology, and preparation, especially when you're working within the development communication space. Because here, an interview isn't just to entertain or inform, it's to empower, to give people a voice, to uncover truths, and to help audiences reflect on issues that matter. So today, let's talk about how interviews are approached, how good ones are made, and what makes them truly meaningful. Now, let's talk about the essence of an interview. When we say interview, we often think of a host throwing questions and then the guest answering. But it's actually more than that. An interview's real goal is to draw out ideas, stories, and emotions, things that help listeners see the world through someone else's eyes. Now, whether it's a farmer talking about climate change, a small business owner sharing their struggles, or a policymaker explaining reforms, a good interview bridges those perspectives for an audience. That's why in development communications, we treat the interview not just as a Q&A, but as a form of social dialogue. One that informs, inspires, and invites critical thinking. Now, what makes it different? See, one major difference between a casual chat and a formal interview is intention. A good interview doesn't argue or to sound smarter than the guest. Because, of course, it's not about them. It's about guiding the conversation so that the audience learns something valuable. Just like what our module says, the interviewer is not there to agree or disagree. He is there to ask questions. And I really love that line because it reminds us that interviews are a kind of service. We are there to help the listeners understand, not to dominate the conversation. Think of programs like the podcast of Mr. Howie Severino or the Ted Filon and DJ Chacha segment on Radio 5. The best moments come not when the host speaks, but when the guest finally opens up. That's the art of asking. Now, let's talk about the interviewer. To me, personally, a good interviewer is a mix of a journalist, a psychologist, and a storyteller. They have to stay objective and factual, but also make the guest feel relaxed enough to speak openly. They need to be curious, but never intrusive. And in DevCom, that role becomes even more crucial because many times we're not just interviewing public figures, we're interviewing regular people, farmers, teachers, vendors, students, people whose voice are rarely heard. So interviewers become the bridge that turns individual experiences into collective awareness. Now, if you will ask me, what's one of the best things about interviews? For me, they're supposed to sound real. An interview isn't meant to sound memorized or scripted because when it's too perfect, it loses emotions. It has to be very conversational. When you listen to shows like Buhay sa Radio or even podcasts like Wake Up with Jim and Sab, one of my personal favorites, what makes them engaging is how unfiltered they sound. To be very exact, Jim and Sab would sometimes even curse live, but that's okay. Also, they would laugh, especially Jim. He has this what we call the dolphin laugh There's laughter, there's pauses, there are raw emotions. And those little imperfections, they actually make it feel like they actually make their segment feel human. That's why spontaneity is part of what makes interviews effective. It's not chaos for me, personally. For me, it sounds more authentic. As communicators, our job is to balance structure with flow. We prepare, but we also allow genuine moments to happen. Now, every interviews actually has three key players. First, the interviewer. These are the people who leads the flow. Second is the interviewee. They are the ones who provide the story or the insight. And finally, the most important ones, the listeners. Because no matter how well the conversation goes, if the audience doesn't relate, the interview fails. Listeners are our invisible partners. They interpret what they hear, they share it, and they react to it. So, as interviewers, we should always keep the audience in mind. Ask yourself, if I were to listen to this radio show on my way to work or while washing the dishes, would I care about this? If not, then you need to reframe your question. So, what makes a good interview? It all starts with a clear purpose. Before you record anything, you must know what information, idea, or emotion you want to highlight. That purpose shapes your choice of guest, your tone, and even your questions. For instance, if your purpose is to raise awareness about the wage inequality, your goal isn't just to get answers, but to spark reflections in your audience. Every follow-up questions should bring you closer to that goal. Even if things go off script, your direction should remain clear. That's what separates a good interviewer from someone who just talks, from someone who just asks. Now, according to our module, there are 8 virtues or best practices in conducting interviews. First, and one of the most important ones, is to prepare. Preparation and research. Know your topic, your guests, one of the most important, and the context of the topic that you're going to talk about. Never ever walk in blind. Next is focused questions. Keep them short, direct, but open enough to explore. Logical flow. Conversations should move naturally from one idea to the next. Next, we have audience relevance. Ask what your listeners would want to know, not just what you find interesting. Impartiality. Stay neutral, even if you have personal opinions. Always remember that. Stay impartial. Control. Manage pace, tone, and energy, especially if the discussion gets heated. Spontaneity. Let real emotions and humor breathe. And last but not the least, good sound quality. Remember in radio, what can't be heard might as well not exist. When you combine these, you get interviews that don't just inform, they engage. Now, why is preparation even important? Why does it matter? I want to emphasize this. Preparation is power. Even if short interviews need background work, your research, your guest. Outline your goals and make sure your technical setup works from batteries up to the microphones. But beyond the technical side, preparation helps you handle the unexpected. If a guest gets emotional, if they go off topic, or if they challenge your question, a prepared interviewer knows how to respond without losing the flow. It's also what separates amateurs from professionals. Because when you're prepared, you can sound spontaneous without actually being unprepared. Now, if you're going to ask me what the secret weapon is of every great interviewers, for me, it's the art of asking. Great questions are simple, but they open doors. They don't just ask for facts, They cover feelings and emotions. Instead of asking, "Do you think the government is helping?" Ask, "How has this policy changed your daily life?" Those kinds of questions, those kinds of messaging. See the difference? One invites reflection, the other shuts down the conversation. In DevCom, we often deal with sensitive topics: poverty, inequality, gender, education. So our question must always be respectful, but probing, gentle, but powerful. That's how we make people feel safe enough to tell the truth. Now, to wrap up, a good interview is both an art and a responsibility. It's planned. It sounds natural. It's professional, but still warm. It's structured, but flexible. A good interview doesn't just record, it reveals. It doesn't just inform, it empowers. In development communication, we use interview as a way to open doors for people, to let them tell their story, and to make sure someone out there listens. And maybe that's the heart of it, listening. Because every time we listen with empathy, we make communication meaningful again. That's all for my part. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope each and every one of us will have a great day. Bye for now.